All right, welcome everybody to episode 3 of According to Andrew. We're going to go over post US castle designs and some other kind of stuff around that. Maybe touch on a little bit of a question that um, Evermore Bear posed, which was what are your readings on Western feudal societies predict will come next for the US as we dissolve? So I'm not exactly going to answer that question, but I did have a kind of world building fun idea on what might happen to one area of the United States post collapse. So I'm going to tell you that to these people, to you guys, and you can do with it as you will. Um, I don't know how much of it is based on reality, but it's some ideas that I thought of and I thought were kind of fun. So, also things we're going to be considering today are uh, World War or walled cities. So Vox's last two videos were really good on this, where he was talking about like kind of the collapse and how smaller city states are going to develop and how we might see a rise in the city state apparatus, and that walled cities are going to make a comeback. So that means when I was a little kid, I wanted a castle, and castles were sweet, and now they're going to have a purpose again, which is dope. Uh, but what are the castles going to look like? Because they're not going to look like medieval castles. They're a little more susceptible to modern weaponry. So what kind of stuff does that look like? And what threats do castles have to withstand? And then we'll get into maybe a little bit of what materials those castles will be made out of then, and some of the advantages. Mainly going to be looking at World War I forts as kind of inspiration for the new designs. So, with all that, let's get into it. And I need my phone to stop locking on me so I can go over stuff. So, the big thing that we're going to be facing going into this collapse is going to be fourth generation warfare, which adds kind of an interesting element to uh, the warfare situation in terms of defensibility, because your fourth generation warfare is primarily a light infantry doctrine, and therefore you don't have supply lines. You are working with people that are carrying 45 pounds or less on the persons, and so you just that doesn't allow for things like heavy weapons and stuff like that. So I think the war fighting that we're going to see is going to be very reminiscent of a lot of African nations that have been in basically constant turmoil since they were founded by the UN, basically. The Congo comes to mind, where they've been at civil war constantly, and so you're not going to have um, air superiority issues to deal with. You don't have to deal with helicopters. You don't have to deal with planes. So therefore, walls are become a very effective um, defense measure again, in terms of keeping your citizens safe, because you're now a singular target, and obviously, what is it? In the like 18th and 19th century, sieges kind of became a formality. It would be, it'd be months of work or whatever, but basically, eventually, because of the cannons and stuff like that, they would blow a hole in your defenses, and then the city would surrender at the end of that. Um, so then that ended up giving way to the ring fortifications, which was a series of forts that could support each other that were much farther out from the city center. It wasn't just a walled city, and those forts created a defensible ring around the city center and could support each other when they were under attack. That's probably too advanced for. It would require too many supplies for post U.S. collapse, possibly. I don't know exactly how rich and how much of the infrastructure we will be able to maintain, won't be able to maintain, what kind of heavy industries will and won't be available. So a lot of that's kind of guesswork. But the one thing that will almost certainly be a threat will be small arms fire and snipers, right? There's plenty of people, not a ton, but the people that have your long distance rifles, I'm sure it's not going to be that many, but it will be enough, and there will be be able to be they're an asset that can be used and and in general aren't going to be risked when used, um, is your like your mile out snipers, and we and those optics and stuff like that have a pretty good chance because the optics are the big thing that's carrying these rifles. Have a pretty good chance of living. Oh, I just realized I'm not on. So those optics have a pretty good chance of living through any turmoil and downturn that America kind of goes through. So I think instead of artillery and stuff like that being the cornerstone that starts pushing stuff, I think you're going to have a lot of long range kind of sniper type fights that are going to try to push people into certain spots, and then the small arms fire is going to take over after that. Could be totally wrong on that, but it seems like a very useful elite unit that you can put out and use pretty regularly without having to risk much, because you don't have to. They're far enough away that it's going to be hard for them to respond because you don't have the artillery, you don't have the air superiority, you don't like trucks and stuff like that are going to be very limited, and therefore it just seems like a very strong weapon to have in a warlord's arsenal. Uh, One thing that you do see in a lot of these conflicts is, you know, you won't have tanks and stuff like that, but you will have trucks, and so anything that you can be mounted in a truck bed and you will be potentially a effective weapon that can be deployed to in special circumstances. I feel like they're going to be a high value unit, so they like a siege is potentially going to risk a hard to replace high value um, troop or unit of people, and so will they want to engage in a siege with those? Probably not. Um, and also you got to consider logistics, like how much are they going to have in terms of fuel and all that stuff to be able to like how far can they project their power with those things, or are they a way to are they more used in a localized defense area? Like that's the thing, like all these things that can be used against you, you potentially also have access to, but you don't have to deal with the logistical supply line side if you have things stockpiled like in your city, and therefore are potentially stronger assets to a defender than they are to an attacker, right? So like they might have trucks and they set them up and they try to shell the town or the city or something like that. But you have your own trucks that can come out, swing behind, attack their supply lines, wreck their entire plan, and then sweep in, destroy that unit, and potentially be able to get um, loot some of those trucks and make them usable, and then grow your own fleet. So kind of a high risk proposition there. Pew Bear, thank you for the follow. Uh, so I don't exactly know what people are going to have to be able to crack these forts that are going to develop um, after the collapse. Now, you also have to have the resources to make the forts, so that's another factor. And so, um, key materials are going to be things like concrete, if that's available, um, bricks and stuff, sand, which you need to make the concrete, but also it's just a very effective absorbent material. So if they do have artillery and things like that, you know, it hits that concrete or whatever, and it messes up the concrete, but then it hits that sand, and you know, just as anybody has you know punched sand or run through sand or whatever, it can disperse and really absorb a lot of effective stuff. um, Thank you very much, Pew Bear. uh, and so yeah, so getting the materials to build these is going to be a pain, and I think they're going to kind of look like World War One forts, which I have a picture of. I brought visuals this time, people. Okay, so this is I believe one of the forts from Verdun, if I pulled this correctly, and it's hard to see exactly what's going on here, but I believe um this is at the top of a hill, and this whole um, the C part where the farther back part is kind of being used to protect the front part, and I think it's tiered. Uh, Obviously, and I could be wrong on that. Nah, that doesn't make any sense. Now that I think about it, I don't know. But this is something that it could look like, and a lot of these were, concrete structures, and then they were basically just had earth pounded or mounted on top of them to absorb all the artillery fire and stuff like that. But doing a little bit of research before starting this, uh, I think at Verdun they had like 8 meters worth of earth piled on top of some of these forts, and by the time that battle was done, it had been chewed down to a meter in some places. Which, I mean, it's still a meter, but like that is a lot of artillery fire. Um, it is highly unlikely that anyone with that's fighting in a fourth generation capacity could field that much artillery to like amass that kind of firepower and do that kind of damage to something. Um, it's just highly unlikely that is even a possibility. Um, and then also, if they can amass that amount, then you yourself should be able to amass that amount of counter response artillery in a sense. And so again, that's where your static positions are going to come in handy because they have the longer supply lines. They have all this stuff where you have all your stockpiles, and as long as those stockpiles don't get hit by an explosive shell, you should be good. To You should have the firepower superiority because you don't have to worry. Like field artillery obviously can't be as big as defensive artillery just because it has to be able to move, where the defensive artillery doesn't have that problem. Um, so those are kind of some of the things. It's kind of interesting that I didn't think walled cities were ever going to make a comeback. Um, Thank you, Steve Vanderbeer, uh, or not Bear, Vanderveld. My bad. And most people that subscribe are bears, so I was thrown off. But thank you for the follow, regardless. So, so the next question kind of becomes, um, how do you take these kind of fortifications? And it might end up being like um, what are they called? The medieval times, where you just didn't, right? You found other ways around it. You starved them out, things like that. Um, because until gunpowder was invented, basically, uh, some castles were basically impenetrable. So until a certain amount of centralization happens and large conventional armies can be fielded with large logistics and massed firepower in terms of like artillery batteries and stuff like that, some of these fortifications might literally just be impenetrable to fourth generation uh, fighting forces, and that might be fine for them. They might just be like, you know what, we're here for the easy pickings. We're gonna go around you, kind of like Vikings, right? Um, England back in the day found the best way to defeat the Vikings was simply build a wall, and then they just don't show up. Um, and so I think we're gonna see a lot of that. Is the people that don't build the walls are just gonna be picked on constantly, and the people that do have the walls are just gonna be left alone. Uh, but yeah, until air superiority kind of comes back, one interesting aspect of air superiority that has the potential to still be a thing post collapse is drones, like the little, um, not like the predator drones, but like just the little drones that you can get, like the quadcopters at like a local store or something like that. Just because they're so effective for things like reconnaissance. Um, Also, uh, because communications are much better nowadays, if any of that infrastructure remains, or ways to get communications to people, having a couple key cities in like a small area that are all fortified and be able to send radio communications to them and be like, hey, we're being besieged. Can you get your people there? Like, uh, sieges always take a long time, and the quicker you can coordinate with other people to help attack and lift the siege, the easier it's going to be uh, for the defenders to be able to defend the castles and stuff like that. So there's a lot of advantages to castles and forts going forward, which is kind of interesting. Um, I assume that Western Washington would be enveloped by foreign forces. Locals would flee to the eastern side of the Cascades, then counter. Um, Western Washington, maybe. So you're saying that, um, like China, like a foreign power that doesn't collapse, comes and tries to invade and take territory from because of the internal turmoil in the United States. Am I understanding that correctly? Uh, where was I? That's possible. I here. So I didn't factor in foreign forces trying to invade. Uh, I'm trying to think of why they would want to. China doesn't really care about like they want to control people economically and they don't have to hold territory to do that. They can just give you loans and do some other trade deals to control you. So in that regard, they'd never have to invade. And that seems to be the China model and kind of the model that the United States introduced as well. So I don't know if large nations are going to interfere. Now, in terms of getting supplies to, like, I think what would happen with China and Russia and stuff like that is is that they would supply some of those heavy weapons that we wouldn't have access to anymore. So let's say um, China wants to get a bunch of resources and he basically wants to secure all of the resources on the west coast. And so they're going to back somebody just kind of like how we back the white Democrats or something like that in the Russian Revolution and how we back and do regime changes all over the world and stuff like that. I think that China and Russia are going to be much more likely to simply donate arms and donate other things like that, and to try to tip the scale in favor of the side they want to win, and then they'll sign lucrative trade deals and other things that basically make the country that wins a colony, with the threat that we will send in our own troops and destroy you if you don't go along with this, and or we'll stop the money pipe, the thing that gives you the arms and stuff like that to be able to protect yourself, or various funds and stuff that will make it so you can run your country. Uh, and then kind of cause, and if that does get turned off, kind of cause their the new dollar and stuff like that to collapse, kind of like Venezuela. That's how I think they would control them. Not necessarily through direct intervention. Could be wrong, but who is attacking who? I'm saying like if there's an internal conflict in the United States, I don't see China and Russia getting involved with their own troops. I see them basically giving arms to the side they want to win, and then setting up uh, uh, deals with them that benefit those nations because they don't like currently they don't have an issue with land. There's a little bit of an issue with land in China, um, so maybe there'd be a reason, but they already kind of have like it's more likely that if they're looking for more land, they're going to look far more local than the west coast of the United States. Um, but that's just my thoughts on it. Who knows? Um, so in terms of what we might see from like a group and what might play out, so I live in the Midwest, and so this is what I came up with. I thought it was kind of fun. Um, so with infrastructure and stuff like that going downhill, I think it things like trucks and stuff like that, it's going to be harder to find gasoline and get gasoline. Now, there's a couple key areas that have access to oil, and if they could potentially get their heavy industry up and running to be able to pump oil out of the ground, refine it, and sell it within their local economy, they might have a massive advantage over other territories. So, those areas in the United States are North Dakota, Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, um, and and that's for the United States. And then there's a couple spots in Canada as well that have access to like this type of oil. Um, so that might give those people a military advantage if they can maintain their roads and use uh, things that require gas, basically. Uh, the next kind of question would be, well, can are trains still a viable option? And again, that's a pretty big maybe. Like that, they require maintenance. They're currently done with pretty heavy industry. If they aren't going to be done with heavy industry, it requires a lot of manpower to maintain these kind of things. Um, so again, it's a maybe. But let's say that because like North Dakota, for example, because that's I used to live there, so that's the one I have a sense of. The oil's in a very remote area. The industry there's not that much like heavy industry and stuff, and all of it's basically geared towards oil, not oil, agriculture. Now they could potentially take that infrastructure and shift it over to key resources, um, and so that's kind of the thing that they're facing. Now, one option they have is like, let's say North Dakota decided to be very aggressive when all this stuff went down, and they're like, all right, well, we have our oil, we have this stuff. There's still enough wealth and stuff like that we could steal to be able to get our heavy industry in place before all this stuff kind of falls apart. They could potentially aggressively go and conquer all of northern Minnesota, and if they did that, they would secure themselves iron in northern Minnesota, and then they would have access to coal, which would be needed for the trains. They'd have steel to be able to build and maintain those trains, and they would have oil to be able to maintain roads, build and do trucks, and run a lot of the heavy agricultural equipment. And so, therefore, they might be in a really good position to maintain their population and have a lot of core things to build on. On top of that, they have a pretty good river system that runs through their place. So let's say all that stuff didn't work anymore. They can still create riverboats to get stuff through that area. Obviously, they ends up going down into the Mississippi, so you have to go through Minneapolis and those areas, which might be enemy territory at that point. But here's the interesting thing. So maybe the United States river system becomes a key point of commerce again, right? And if that happens, then maybe the uh, the Cajun people of Louisiana uh, rise up as a major New Orleans rises up as a major port city again and becomes like a central trade hub for the Midwestern area. So basically, you'd kind of the the city states that are vying for political control would probably be divided by rivers and mountains. So here, so you'd have like the West Coast that was divided by the Rockies. You'd have the East Coast that was divided by the Appalachians, and then you have some of the like you have the Mississippi that goes through the center, and that would kind of connect a lot of the um, Midwest areas, along with all of the rivers that branch out from that. And you have some river systems. Was it the Colorado River in which the Hoover Dam is built on? That might be a central area. And so, yeah, I thought it was kind of a fun idea where Louisiana breaks off. They become like a Cajun, like they embrace their Cajun heritage, and they changed their language to French. They create an alliance with Quebec and France, and they kind of have like this quasi French heritage type thing. They're all unique. They're different things, but they also have like the French shared thing. Thought it was kind of an interesting idea. Does it necessarily make sense? Yeah, probably not. Um, One thing that might also start being a thing is cowboys might be coming back. Cowboys and Indians might be coming back because as the whole thing collapses, there's absolutely no reason for the Native Americans to stay on their reservations, right? And now a lot of the plains are opened up again, and cattle has always been a big thing throughout the Great Plains, and so you could have basically a new breed of nomads, probably split between the Native Americans and what they used to do, and like the cowboys and how they run stuff, and they're probably not doing any technology stuff. They're probably driving all these cattle on horseback, just like back in the day. Um, they might be using modern guns and stuff like that if there's enough of that. But maybe they have to go back to bow and arrows because that's something that's easier to maintain. And you don't need the industry. You don't need to trade for more bullets and stuff like that. And so you would have this nomadic thing kind of going from probably Texas up into North Dakota, maybe even up into certain parts of Canada or whatever, where you have all that grass to munch on and just kind of going back and forth, potentially leading to conflict with different nations. Um, and different people who are non-nomadic and stuff like that, but also potentially being a very key um, aspect for trade. And they come in and maybe it creates conflict because they use up all the water and it's a drought year and they needed that water to for their plants, and maybe they're roaming onto their fields and they're eating up all their wheat and stuff like that. So there's conflict there, but also they come on and they're a good like local people like to trade with them because they can get fresh meat, which might be a luxury at this period of time because I don't know how much like the electrical infrastructure is another big question mark. Um, and so it might be one of those times that uh, you can get only time like when those people come through. It might be one of the only times you can get beef. Uh, so a bunch of stuff to think about. That was just kind of a fun little. That little last part was just kind of a world building ideas that I had going on in my head that I thought were kind of fun. Uh, I I could potentially make more for other parts of the United States, but that was just based on things that I knew and um, areas I'd lived in uh, to base that stuff. I like Cajun food, so that's kind of why I gave New Orleans all that the props and stuff like that. But it would be kind of interesting if like New Orleans ended up being kind of the central trade hub for like the Midwest, and then um, both coasts have their various trade hubs because they have spots all along the coastline that they can do. But yeah, it's be interesting to see what happens. And then Texas is probably going to fall back into Mexican hands. So there's that. But hey, maybe the Texans won't run off to Oklahoma. Maybe they'll stand and fight, and we'll have a little bit of Texas in the new area. Who knows? Um, but yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on that. Kind of all over the place, but kind of fun. Castles might be making a comeback, so I'm excited about that. Key resources are probably going to be clay, sand, um, and rocks, obviously. Anything you can make a mortar or a concrete type thing. If you can get rebar, great. Um, there might be a way to design it where you don't need rebar. That's an interesting design idea and aspect that maybe I should try to tackle. But um, yeah, that's kind of what I got. Anybody got any questions before I head out? All right. If not, this will be on YouTube. For the people on YouTube, I stream these on D Live. It seems like every other day now, and I don't have a set time. So you're just gonna have to subscribe and follow over there. And I'm on Social Galactic. If you're not on that, you should be. So sign up for unauthorized.tv and get Social Galactic, and then follow me on there. Uh, and then, so this will be on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. Uh, leave if you want me to discuss a particular topic. Leave a comment. You're in the advantageous stage where there's like 5 people that listen to this, and therefore, uh, I can actually get to all the comments and stuff like that. And so, the probability that I listen to what you say, much much higher. Um. Anyway, that's kind of what I got, and yeah, let me know your thoughts below. Anyway, have a good day, and see you next time.